There are not many security experts in the market, and you bring them on to do very administrative tasks. And they get frustrated, and down the road, they will just go somewhere else.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 221. Treat security like a bug with simplicity. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, our security people that work in our companies, they never seem to catch a break, do they?
Or they never seem to give a break to others. It's one of the two. Depends on the organization, right?
It does depend. But the one thing that's consistent right now is budgets are getting cut across the board. Welcome to 2023. I mean, heck, we're in the middle of 2023 and budgets are still getting cut. But yet the security teams just cannot say, well, we lost half of our budget, so we're only going to give you half security. That's just not going to happen.
That's actually the beauty of those cuts, if you ask me. I like the cuts because they're forcing companies to rethink how they do things. Now, some companies rethinking it in terms of I'm going to fire everybody, but others are rethinking and coming to conclusions that they might be able to do things smarter, faster, better, instead of just doing the same old.
And on today's show, we've got Ravid Circus on from Seemplicity. Ravid, how you doing?
Great, thanks, guys.
In full transparency, we're recording this in May, and you were recently at RSA. What we were just talking about was one of the consistent themes that you were seeing at RSA, correct?
Correct. I think that because security teams cannot secure the organization less just because they have less people or less tools, they're actually being asked to do more with less. And a lot of the themes around RSA was about automation and hyper-automation and how actually we can bring more productivity to the processes that the security teams were running for many years. Some of them were manual, some of them was very ineffective, but how we take them to the next level and actually allow the security teams to keep secure the organization even though they have less resources than the past.
So initially they used to be manual, but then you just used a phrase that I've heard in the past, but not in this context, hyper-automation. If somebody's still manual today, how can they even get to hyper-automation at this point?
Baby steps will be the answer, but I think you first need to recognize that you have a problem and see how you take that manual process and identify what are the bottlenecks in that process. One of the biggest things that is very clear in the security world is that, for example, security teams are responsible to make the organization more secure, but in many aspects, they cannot actually execute that. They cannot do the code better. They cannot install a patch on a machine. They cannot change a configuration of resources in the cloud. So it's their responsibility to make it more secure, but it's not their authority. It's the authority of the DevOps, of the developers, of the engineering. And they kind of sit in the middle and need to drive that process. And then the question is how we look at that and how we understand that their goal is to actually drive a process, make other people to do their work, and how we can make that communication and collaboration more effective. So the organization as a whole will be more productive in focusing and fixing these kind of problems.
That's very curious when you get to be responsible for something without being able to be responsible for something, right?
Exactly.
In those extreme situations, which to me, to be honest, are silly, but I understand how they are actually very common. What is the solution to propose a fix, like here's a pull request. I cannot merge it to the main line, but I can propose it?
I think that some of it is really the discussions that are happening today. They call it shift left, when you take the security and move it left in the development chain. So you actually put some checks and tests and blocks in the development lifecycle, in the release lifecycle, so vulnerable or misconfigured code will not get into production. The other side of it is, even if it got into production, many times new vulnerabilities being discovered in the world, new techniques being discovered in the world, and you kind of need to go and refix those. I think the main thing is not just the fix. I think one of the problems is to make sure that there is a synchronization, because a security tool will find a problem whenever it finds a problem, but the developer works in sprint. It has a 2 weeks sprint cycle. So the fact that you sent it something right now doesn't mean that he will drop off everything and will fix it right now. You actually need to try and adopt the way that the security teams work to the way that developers and DevOps work. So they have a 2-week sprints, they have bugs, they have features, and today they have that list of security things that managed in a completely different way, out of band, sometimes in spreadsheets, sometimes in status meetings every month. It's very not effective. If the developer or the product manager or the project manager will have bugs, will have features, and will have security issues in the same backlog, that will make a long way in the ability of the fixers to actually include those on their plans, rather to be very, very reactive and in a firefighting kind of mode.
But then there are situations when those others who are fixers often do not know what to fix. There is a CV, XYZ, this cannot pass, right? And then you send it to people and they say, yeah, but what?
So true. So that's part of the things. The security team talks about problems, CV, and the remediation teams wants to get solutions, upgrade this and that to a specific version. And I think that one of the goals of making something that will improve the productivity is actually to transform the discussion from the problems world to the remediation world. Because if what we are trying to do is to make the organization more secure, we need to track the fixes. We don't need to track the problems. The problems will just tell you how bad we are. Tracking the solution will make you understand how good we are getting. And I think that one of the biggest things there is to stop looking on problems and transforming them to action items, or if you want to call them remediation items, and then have those fixers actually manage those and act upon actionable remediation items rather than generic security problems that only few people understand.
What you just said there, stop looking at the problems, actually turns everything upside down. That's not how we were taught in school. That's not how business has been run for the past 50 years. Practically, how do we stop looking at the problems? I mean, I'm used to seeing stacks of audit findings, right? You get those typical spreadsheets and you're going through this spreadsheet and spreadsheet after spreadsheet. And it's like, okay, I've got 6 criticals and then 7,000 mediums. How do I not look at the problem?
So I think part of the great things that we have these days about technologies and the ability to work around the data is actually the ability to transform them. I have a story about one of my colleagues, which is a great security engineer, one of his best. He was telling me the story about, I spent half a morning in analyzing a specific vulnerability, and I got to the conclusion that it's a false positive, not relevant to my environment. And therefore, I don't need anyone to fix that. And I was so happy about that. But then I moved to the next critical in the list, and that needed to be fixed. And it was on the same exact package. It was the exact same piece of code, which means that I spent the entire morning on marking something as false positive that I still need to act upon. And I think that using the data technologies that we have today, we can transform and have a machine transform it from a list of problems to list of solutions, and to say that this solution actually affecting 3 criticals, 2 highs, 10 lows, and that's the reason to go and deploy it right now rather than later. So I think it's all about data processing for a lot of data points which exist today in the organization, but we just need to collect them to one point and actually help to do that transformation.
I like the part when you said that it doesn't affect And I have a feeling that much of security is still very based on very static scanners that do not take into the account the environment where something is running, right? The fact that you have a high severity vulnerability in a library that might not be ever invoked in the code might actually result in panic mode for no good reason at all, because there is a vulnerability, but it's not exploitable, right?
So there are two different aspects to look at that. I think that the first one, you mentioned scanners, and scanners is a great technology, but I think that we as a market evaluate scanners based on the number of results they produce. If you will do a POC for a scanner and one will create 100 findings and the other one will create 1,000 findings, which one you will choose? Will you be able to say that the one that find the 100 findings is the right tool and it didn't miss 900 findings which are not important? So because we don't know to say that, we as a market directed or incentivized the scanners tool to produce more findings. Okay? And then we are saying, well, there are way too many findings, we cannot handle that noise. Because we have too many findings, then we need to prioritize them. So let's prioritize only those which are exploitable. And when you prioritize only those which are exploitable, there are two problems. One is that you start to fix only when it becomes an imminent threat, only when that threat is now active. So you start to fix only after it's a problem. It's a big problem running right now in the wild. The second thing is that you will always be in a firefighting mode, because every time that something is being prioritized, you stop the world and fix it, instead of trying to create a process that actually allow you, first of all, to understand what is really important. Also, focus on the solutions rather than sorting tens and hundreds and thousands of findings, and actually create a process that actually reduce the cost of every finding, of every fix, and by that allowing the organization to fix more and prioritize less, and actually be more resilient rather than in a continuous firefighting for those which are already out there in the wild and are critical risks.
Basically, you're saying we have the Oprah effect today. You get a scanner, you get a scanner, you get a scanner. And then what we're doing is we're taking all these scanner results, mashing them together and coming up with a list that nobody will ever get through in their lifetime.
Correct. Nobody will get to them because, by the way, for many reasons. Let's assume that you have 200 criticals and you're a security guy. You start and you can dedicate to that list 2 hours today. So what you do out of those 200, you take the top 20. Statistically, that top 20 can go to one team in your organization, and you are going to overload that team with 20 findings, but the 180 are for different teams in your organization, and they are completely in the dark. They don't even know that they have security problems until you will get to them next week and send the next batch of 20 findings. But they already waited a week, and those are high risk, so it's already waited a week. Let's do it quickly. Let's do it right now. If you could have a machine that actually knows to identify automatically which findings go to which team, how the backlog of each of those teams looks like, and feed them so the security team do not need to review the list top to bottom, you will actually get an organization that can fix more and not dependent on the throughput of the security team on reviewing those lists.
What we've been talking about sort of right now is just the static analysis and, to an extent, the dynamic analysis. One thing we don't see a whole lot of people talk about, and what I think is the most important, is the runtime analysis. Because just because I've fixed my things statically and I've fixed my things dynamically, magic hand wave, that will never happen in real life. But let's assume that it did. The code still runs. And to me, that's the most critical part of security that I think most people don't even look for. Forget about scanning, even watch for and monitor correctly. How can people even attempt to do that today?
I think the runtime scanning have two problems, okay? First of all, there are tools that scanning today the runtimes. But when you get a finding on the runtime, this is not where you need to go and fix that. You need to go and fix that on your build time, on your development time, and then roll out the entire thing again. And not necessarily the security team, when they see a finding on the runtime, they know to link it back to the build time or to the development time and actually send it to the right team. The other side of it is all those tools that are not being actively developed. Because if they are being actively developed, maybe someone will see those vulnerabilities throughout the development pipeline and will block them before they go to production. But many applications out there are in some kind of support mode, maintenance mode, meaning that they don't get new code, but the vulnerabilities in the world keep being populated, and no one goes back to those lists and send them back saying, guys, we need a new version to fix all those vulnerabilities. So I think that runtime has the problem of where do I need to deploy the fix? It's not on the on the runtime, it's on the build time and redeploy everything. But also what happens to all those things which are not in active development cycle, but more in a maintenance mode, and I need to reactively go back and push changes, even though I don't develop this application. I do need to push changes to make it more secure from changes that happen outside the world. So I think there are many complications with those runtimes. One of the realities of both those facts is that we're seeing a lot of incomplete deployments, meaning someone fixed the problem in development, marked that the Jira issue was done, kind of deployed that, but he didn't deploy that across all the environments. He didn't deploy that across all the workloads. And you are getting mixed kind of results about that being, when you open the ticket to the engineer, we said, of course, it's not in the code anymore, but the runtime scanner still identify the problems, which create a lot of mess, a lot of friction between the security team and the development teams. And again, data that exists today, different data points that exist today in the organization actually allow you to tie back the runtime to the build time and being able to point saying, guys, this was fixed in the build, this was fixed in the code, it was just not deployed or not deployed completely. And I think that those are the kind of things that will, again, if we're talking about manual processes, if we're talking about doing more with less, we actually can use all those data points to reduce all those inconsistencies and actually allow the organization to be less in managing lists and actually understand, what failed. Is that the deployment that was failed? Is the code was incomplete? And so on and so forth.
Let's assume for a moment a company hasn't had to cut back. They're still doing well. They didn't have to cut any headcount. Obviously, they should be thinking doing more with less. What are some of the things that people could do today? Like engineering managers, whatever, security managers, what could they start implementing today to help them get ready for the eventuality that they're going to lose headcount?
So I think there are a couple of things. I think even organization that doesn't lose headcounts find that they take a very, let's call it expensive, talented security people and let them do administrative tasks of copy and pasting issues to Jira, of chasing statuses of tickets. So you take people that are not exist in the market, there are not many security experts in the market, and you bring them on to do very administrative tasks. And they get frustrated, and down the road, they will just go somewhere else. So even if you don't have cutbacks, you actually want to take that security people and have those focus on security activities rather than on the raw administration of driving remediation. Even if you are the best company in the world, if you don't have cutbacks, you are very concerned with your experts' retention. And that's a big part of it. For the others, I think that in general, because security has the responsibility, but don't have the authorization, we are talking about an organizational process that needs to run. And therefore, you need to look at that not as an engineering kind of effort. You need to look at that as a business process where collaboration and communication and clear goals and clear methods are very important, to actually look at that as a business process rather than a security issue that needs to be resolved right now, and start to measure it in the right way. So if we are looking on findings, we look on the output of the scanners. If we are looking on remediation items, we look on the outcome of an organization that become more secure because we fixed that. And in the same way, stop counting how many problems you have, but start counting how many things that you have solved in the last week, month, quarter, whatever it is. Start focusing on the outcome, which means that the security team needs to sit for a day in the chair of those fixers. See how they get the tickets, see what information are in there, see how it looks like that in the middle of the sprint you get 2 tickets from one security tool, which you don't know about, and 3 other tickets from a second security tool, which you don't know about. And you as the fixer need to kind of choose which one you want to do first. That's not my job, that's the security team. So I think if you start thinking on the outcome, it means that the security team should not focus on what their security tools are doing, but actually focus on how they sit in the fixer's chair, understand the process from their point of view, and see how they optimize that for remediation, not for discovery.
That's also sometimes a little sticky because you don't necessarily want security people talking directly to the fixers for, reasons, right? There are legitimate reasons behind that. I'm thinking red team, blue team type scenarios.
Yeah.
Why not? I'm curious now. Why not speak?
No, I think that red teams, some of the methodologies around red teams is that we are doing that as a black box. We try to evaluate like an outside attacker that knows nothing about the environment. But that's for the discovery part. Once you complete the discovery part and you know what your problems are, the collaboration between the security teams and the fixer is very important for effective remediation. And that's why I think that we should kind of separate the methodologies and practices around scanning and discovery and what we need to know about the environment in order to understand the problems, and to separate from the processes that actually helps to drive remediation. And those processes must be in a very high synchronization and very high collaboration between the security teams and the fixers.
So basically what you're saying is at certain points in time, as we're going through the timeline of an application, the fixers and the security people are wearing different hats.
Yep.
But at some point, those hats come off, and now we're on the same team. Correct. Trying to do the resolve until we go back and become our red team, blue team again.
Correct.
So we're basically being okay. That seems reasonable. I tend to be a little more aggressive because I think more in open source. But inside, so the way I would deal with open source is if a bug is found, I'm not going to put those out in public, right? I'm going to work directly with whoever the maintainer is and try to get that resolved in private until we actually do the security advisory and release it. Thinking within a company, though, would I do the same thing? Would I be that extreme in, security team found this one thing. It's a really large organization. I don't even trust people within my own organization. Do I apply that same level of structure as I would in an open source project?
At the end, it's all about risk and risk appetite and risk management. Because at the end of the day, security need to be enabler for the business. Just as an example, if holiday season is just behind the corner and you have an e-commerce application that most of the money that it makes is throughout those holiday season, and you as a security team says, we cannot put that in the air for the next 2 weeks just because there are security issues, you miss the entire business context of that application. There is a balance between the risk of putting that in the outside rather than the risk of losing the business. And I think that part of the discussion and part of the collaboration between the teams is why we should fix it, what we should fix, and whether we should fix it right now, or whether we can live for a week, a month, a quarter with some kind of a risk acceptance or an exception process that actually allows us to make the business continue and revisit that. The thing is that to manage those exceptions in scale, we get back to discussion about data points and the fact that you actually need to have that in one single place. So you will actually be able to go and revisit him in a month, that all those things that you say, yes, guys, understand, business is more important, let's put that in the air, actually was recovered after that month has passed. I think that's the main thing. There are a lot of decisions of let's put it out there because we have to, but how we make sure that we do close that exposure in the right timelines and we take care of that and not just leaving that because we decided to put it out of the door.
So what I hear is something along the lines, instead of just giving lists to people, that maybe security experts should be involved in planning of sorts of the workloads for the upcoming sprint or sprints or epics and things like that, and be more involved in what should be done and when?
I think that there is a lot of processes today in the SDLC, Secure Development Lifecycle processes that actually do that. There is some kind of threat modeling when we look in the application and see, what are the possibilities, what are the threats for this application. Someone to steal the identity, someone to report wrong information. And based on that, you actually work with the development teams to actually put some countermeasures, either by monitoring or by actually preventing those kind of threats. But this works very well when you start a new application from scratch. The problem is many times we have those applications that were developed for the last 2 or 3 years and have the variety of problems. Some of them was not known about. Some of them was not attack vectors that were exist when we planned that application. But we need right now to go and fix that. We need right now to go and make it more secure. And that's where the more friction processes starts, because we are already in accumulation of problems. Some of them are more important than others. And we need to be able to communicate that as clear plans side by side with features and bugs and the general roadmap of those applications and their business needs.
Do product people really think about threat modeling when they're working on new features? We were talking about greenfield, that's one thing, but let's say you've got an ongoing thing, you're edge tagging a new feature to it. That's something I don't see a whole lot, is people don't really put that. Maybe it's not the lead because the lead should be the feature itself, but the threat modeling should be near that top level as well. What do you think?
It depends on how mature the organization is. I think that you find more and more organization, especially those more, let's call it more modern, born in the cloud ones, that actually have that done the right way. But when you inherit an online banking application that was developed 6-7 years ago and you now move it to the cloud, you're actually not able to do a good threat modeling to actually understand all the aspects of that. So you're actually going to the very basics. Let's review authentication, authorization, access control, etc. But also let's apply some best practices by scanning the code, by scanning the packages, by scanning the configuration, and at least make sure that those obvious problems are not there.
Again, I'm going to go back to what we were talking about earlier. That what you just said ties into that, is we should be counting solutions and not the problems. What you just said there is, okay, we got to find what is a problem, quote unquote. Because in reality, counting problems from a security perspective, that's basically infinity forever. So it's infinity on top of infinity, because we're going to keep finding things that were considered secure in the past, but that are no longer secure. So why bother counting that? Let's focus on the wins that we're actually getting. So what are some of the more interesting solutions that you've seen come out? Like we've had 10 solutions come out this past quarter. What have you heard from people of, okay, boy, this was a really interesting one? Have you heard any stories like that?
I don't think that I have a specific stories. I think that I have a lot of stories on the other part of it. Not the success stories, but actually the opposite of that. All those ineffective stories, all those stories about by the time we deployed that patch, there was a new vulnerability in that version, and we had to redo it. Again, going back to talk about solutions and talk about what is the best action items. So 2 months ago, we were having a status meetings. We decided to install version 1.5.6. By the time we installed that, 1.5.6 was vulnerable, and we had to go and install 1.5.7. Part of talking about manual processes, part of talking about doing more with less, is the fact that if it takes you 2 months to determine that you need to install 1.5.6, if this is already vulnerable, when the engineer comes to take the action, by definition, wasting time in putting a vulnerable version in place. So we actually need to reduce that time for preparing to remediation, so we will not find ourselves taking actions on things which are already not relevant, obsolete, or vulnerable. So I don't have success stories. I have tens and hundreds of failure stories.
Right. So basically, they were solutions. They were just failed solutions when they actually launched.
Or they were good solution, but they were good solutions to that point in time, but because it took you too much time because of all the manual processes to get them deployed, they already become the wrong solutions. So you find yourself at the point that you deploy something which is you already need to start thinking on how you deploy that again. And if you would have reduced that time, then you would have been more secure for longer time. Might need to do again the fix, but it won't be as not effective as deploying something which is already broken just because the time has passed.
How do we speed up that cycle safely?
So I think there is a lot of data involved. There is a lot of data points in the organization, both on the security tools side and both on the engineering side, to actually collect all that information, cross-correlate it, and be very effective in this is what we need to do. This is the code that we need to fix. These are all the runtime appearances of that code. Let's see how we roll this out. I think that the second part of it is really going back to the communication. I had a discussion with one of my colleagues talking about the fact that, yes, on Monday we got 5 issues from one tool. On Monday we got multiple issues from the other tool. And then on the third day we got a couple from a third tool. I'm, as a developer, close the Jira, go back to the security team, tells them, guys, we got too many from 2 different places. I don't know where to start. Okay, let's do a meeting. When is everyone available? Yeah, let's look at the calendars. Everyone is available 3 weeks out. Nothing happened in between. Now imagine that you could have created some kind of thing that consistently send every sprint the top 5. Fix those top 5 for this sprint, and then we will get you the next top 5 to the next sprint. A human cannot do that. A system can definitely do that, and actually create a rolling backlog of security findings, security remediation items that you need to address, as opposed to the very ineffective processes of we don't do nothing for 3 weeks, but then what we need to do it right now. So I think there is a lot of using data, a lot of using automation, and this is where we start to talk about automation and hyper-automation, to actually consistently create backlog of security issues for each of the fixers teams, for each of the remediation teams, and have that as part of their ongoing cycle, even to the extent of making security as a self-service. In today, modern security teams, they have responsibility for operating system, they have responsibility for middleware, they have responsibility for networking, they have responsibility for the application. They just don't have responsibility for the security. The security team will tell you what your problems whenever they're ready for. And I'm saying, let's change that paradigm. Let's make security self-service for those developers, for those product managers, for those engineering managers. They don't care how many security tools you have. They want to get one consistent backlog, prioritized based on your better understanding of security, and we will execute on that. So we can actually take tools and take technology to do exactly that. Centralize all the data, prioritize it based on the best security understanding, and create a consistent backlog that can be self-served by the fixers, which actually need to take the action items.
Now, if there was only a solution for making this easy, wait, I think that's probably what you do with Seemplicity, correct?
Correct. So yes, I think that you can definitely hear how passionate I am about this problem. And this is exactly what we do in Seemplicity in the last 2.5 years. I spent a lot of time with both security teams and with developers trying to go through their day-to-day motion. And the friction and frustration that was there was actually amazing. And me as a security practitioner in the past was experiencing that myself, the amount of manual work. And at some point in time, we kind of say, guys, we are in 2020, whatever, 1, 2, 3. We cannot continue to work with spreadsheets. No one can imagine developing a software without Jira. How we can imagine running security teams with multiple workload applications in a digital transformation area with 2-week sprints and keep doing that in spreadsheets. Those are the things that we kind of went into analyze those processes, understand where we can improve them, and that's how we created Seemplicity. We basically created a platform that take the big problem of synchronization between security tools and fixers and actually automate that. transforming that to remediation items, removing duplications, managing the backlog automatically to each of the teams, identifying which team needs to resolve that, and actually take those manual processes away, allowing first the organization to fix, then to fix more, but in general, make the organization more resilient and reduce the friction between security team and fixers because they are now looking at the same list. They are now in synchronization between all the parties, so we don't need to do a status meeting 3 weeks out and nothing happens in between. So that's exactly the things that we are addressing in Seemplicity today, and at least in my view, with a very great success.
So the key part is find the things that are important to fix. Those are prioritized as here's your top 5, here's your top 3, whatever everybody comes to agreement on. These are the ones that we're going to work on, and we don't care about the other things for now.
Correct.
And then we move on and do the dance again on whatever our next sprint cycle is.
Correct. Actually make security like a bug. Security at the end of the day is a bug. It's not a functional bug. It's a bug that can cause unintended behavior of the application. But we don't manage it that way. We manage that as a separate list with that headache of things that it's a complete firefighting. And I said, yeah, guys, let's do the exact opposite. Let's make it a bug. Let's make it equivalent to all other things, which means the fixers can actually own it and not but just be responsive, but actually can be part of making their application more secure.
Is it a bug or is it a feature? Only you can decide.
Yeah, but that's true for everything.
Exactly. That's sort of the funny part of this is if we can move, and I like how you said this, it's 2023 people. Don't be managing things, whether it's security lists, you name it, in spreadsheets. Get a tool that does the thing. You were saying Jira. Okay. Look, Jira is not my favorite thing in the world, or maybe in the universe, but it does the job.
Correct.
So I'm okay with it. It does what it needs to do.
To me, the key there is not that it's Jira versus spreadsheet, but it needs to go through the same workflow and the same system as the rest, is what you call bugs, right? If it's somehow separate from all the other things that I need to do, it's going to get separate attention as well, right? If it's in the same system, slightly different, right?
Exactly. And you know, I discussed with one security leader that told me, if I will hear one of my team asking again, what is the latest version of the spreadsheet of the critical vulnerabilities, I will go mad. Okay? And I think that it's exactly that. It might be Jira, or you don't like Jira. It might be something else. But there need to be a single source of truth. There need to be the go-to platform, the go-to list that everyone agree upon, that everyone measured upon, that everyone is synchronized upon. And spreadsheets are not the way to do that.
There's that psychological effect, I feel, that if I go and see all my tickets, doesn't matter whether it's Jira or the GitHub issues or whatever, if I see all my tickets and you're somehow separate, you're separate. You're not part of that team, right? That's not, I'm never going to get to that before I get to the things where I go daily, right?
Exactly. And I think that also that's just as a side note, that's also a problem of security tools. So you have one security tool that have a great integration with Jira. You implemented that integration. You have another security tool that doesn't have such a great integration with Jira. It actually means that no one will fix those problems ever. They are not in the life cycle. They are not in the bloodstream of the organization. And actually have something that actually take it from all the different security tools and mandate the exact same process. Actually promise that you will actually address the critical findings from each of the tools, not related to how good or bad their process integration is, but actually related to how risky that problem is.
So Seemplicity is at seemplicity.io, and Seemplicity is not spelled like how it sounds, but it does. It's SEEMPLICITY.io, seemplicity.io. If you didn't catch that, look down in the episode description. There will be links to that, as well as Ravid's contact information. Ravid, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, you guys. It was insightful.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.